October 1982, Atlanta, Georgia. Tab Cola was the #1 diet soda in America. Not Diet Pepsi, not Diet Right. Tab, Coca-Cola's 1-calorie pink can, held absolute dominion over every supermarket shelf from Maine to California. That year, Tab commanded 4% of the entire American soft drink market. Not the diet segment. The entire market, regular and diet combined. In an industry worth tens of billions of dollars, that number represented an empire built 1 calorie at a time. 40 million Americans reached for that pink can every week. They knew the jingle. They knew the taste. Sharp, slightly metallic, with a clean finish that nothing else on the market could quite replicate. Tab wasn't a compromise. For the people who drank it, Tab was a choice. Then Coca-Cola made a decision. Not Pepsi, not RC Cola, not some scrappy upstart from a regional bottler in the Midwest. Coca-Cola, the same company that invented Tab, that bottled Tab, that built Tab into a billion-dollar franchise, turned around and launched a competing product aimed directly at Tab's core drinkers. Within 18 months, Tab lost the top position it had spent nearly 2 decades building. It never got it back. What followed was one of the strangest slow-motion endings in American beverage history. Tab didn't go bankrupt. It didn't get recalled. No health scandal finished it off for good. For 38 more years, Coca-Cola kept Tab alive on a handful of shelves in a handful of cities. Not because the brand was growing. Not because it was profitable in any meaningful sense, but because a fiercely devoted group of drinkers would call the Atlanta headquarters and write letters and sign petitions every single time a rumor of discontinuation surfaced. Coca-Cola kept Tab breathing. It just never gave it a reason to live. But the real story of Tab is not the story of a brand that lost a market share battle. It is the story of what happens when a corporation creates something genuinely great, then decides that greatness has become inconvenient. Every week, we tell the stories behind the brands and the companies that shaped American life. Give the video a like and subscribe if you want to keep hearing them. The story begins in Atlanta in 1963. In the spring of 1958, a small cola company in Columbus, Georgia, made a quiet decision that would eventually force the hand of the most powerful beverage corporation on earth. Royal Crown Cola, RC Cola, to anyone who actually drank it, introduced Diet Right Cola to the American market. It was not the first sugar-free soft drink ever made. A man named Hyman Kirsch had invented no-cal ginger ale in Brooklyn back in 1952, primarily for diabetic patients at his family's sanitarium. Diet Right was different. It was positioned not for the sick, but for the weight-conscious, a distinction that seems obvious now, but was genuinely radical in 1958. Within 2 years, Diet Right was the 4th best-selling soft drink in the United States. It trailed only Coca-Cola, Pepsi Cola, and 7-Up, a regional cola brand with a fraction of the distribution muscle of its competitors, had carved out a market that the giants had dismissed entirely. Coca-Cola saw the numbers. The people running the most recognized consumer brand in human history understood immediately that they were behind. But Coca-Cola had a problem that RC Cola did not. The name Coca-Cola carried a weight that no other soft drink name in the world could match. And that weight cut both ways. To attach the word diet to Coca-Cola felt, to the executives in Atlanta, like an admission of fault. Like telling the world that the original formula was somehow deficient. For nearly 2 decades, that logic would hold. Coca-Cola would not produce a diet drink under its own name. Not yet. What they would do instead was build something entirely new. In 1962, Coca-Cola launched a classified internal initiative. They called it Project Alpha. The objective was precise. Develop the best-tasting diet cola ever made. Give it a name that carried no medical connotations whatsoever. And get it onto shelves before the diet soda market solidified around Diet Right and whatever Pepsi was about to introduce. The research and development team in Atlanta worked against a hard deadline. The marketing department was handed a parallel assignment. Find a name. What happened next says something revealing about how Coca-Cola thought about innovation. Rather than convene a room of creative directors with legal pads and espresso, the company turned to its IBM 1401 computer. The machine generated a list of more than 185,000 four-letter words containing a single vowel. Staff suggestions were added to the pool. Words that were unpronounceable, trademarked, or too close to existing brand names were eliminated one by one. From a final list of roughly 20 candidates, one name survived every filter: Tab. A quiet play on words. Keep tabs on your weight. Shortened during development to Tab, designer Sid Dickens gave it the capitalization pattern that would appear on every can and bottle for the next 57 years. Taby. The lowercase a between two capitals was a small eccentricity that somehow made the name impossible to forget. Tab entered test markets in the spring of 1963. It was not sold under the Coca-Cola label. Technically, it was distributed through Coca-Cola's subsidiary, the Fanta Beverage Company, a deliberate structural choice that kept the Coca-Cola name at arm's length from the diet category. The original bottle was a 6.5-ounce glass container with a raised, textured surface. A ribbed pattern that made it immediately recognizable by touch alone. The label was red and white. The slogan was direct: "How can 1 calorie taste so good?" The formula relied on a combination of 2 artificial sweeteners, cyclamate and saccharin. Cyclamate, it carried the bulk of the sweetness. Saccharin filled in the gaps. The pairing produced something that the laboratory team had spent months chasing: a cola that tasted genuinely close to the real thing. Not identical, but close enough that the gap didn't feel like punishment. The carbonation was tight and fine. The finish was clean. There was a slight citrus edge that distinguished it from anything else in the diet category. It was good. Not great yet, but good enough. Tab's first year was not a triumph. The brand captured roughly 10% of the American diet soda market in 1963. A respectable number for a new product, but well short of the dominance Coca-Cola's distribution network should have delivered. Part of their problem was self-inflicted. In the same year Tab launched, Coca-Cola introduced Fresca, a grapefruit-flavored diet soda that immediately competed with Tab for the same calorie-conscious consumer. Atlanta was running 2 diet brands simultaneously, with limited marketing resources divided between them, in a category the company hadn't fully committed to in the first place. Tab survived that first uncertain year not because Coca-Cola believed in it with full conviction, but because the drinkers who found it believed in it completely. They came back, they brought their friends, in diners and drugstores and office break rooms across the American South and Northeast. A quiet loyalty was forming around a pink-labeled bottle that its own parent company regarded, at best, as a useful experiment. That loyalty would keep Tab alive through everything that came next, through the sweetener bans, through the health scares, through the rise of a far more powerful competitor, through 38 years of corporate neglect. It would not, in the end, keep Tab alive forever. But it came closer than anyone at Coca-Cola headquarters expected. By 1965, Tab was available in every Coca-Cola vending machine in the United States. No competing diet soda could make that claim. Diet Right had regional strength. Diet Pepsi, introduced in 1964, had Pepsi's distribution muscle behind it. But neither of them had what Tab had: the single most comprehensive beverage delivery network ever assembled in American history, running from corner drugstores in rural Mississippi to stadium concession stands in New York City. Tab didn't need to win the taste test to win the shelf. It simply needed to be everywhere. And it was. But distribution alone does not build a loyal drinker. What built Tab's drinkers was the product itself. And understanding what made that product genuinely different requires understanding what diet soda actually was in 1963 and how low the bar had been set. Before Tab, diet soda in America was, By most accounts, a form of medicinal endurance. No-cal and Diet Right were functional products. They did what they promised, which was to remove sugar from the equation. What they did not promise, and largely did not deliver, was pleasure. The sweeteners, available in the early 1960s, carried a characteristic bitterness that settled on the back of the palate after each sip. Drinkers who needed to avoid sugar accepted this as the cost of admission. Everyone else stayed with regular Coke or Pepsi and didn't give the diet category a second look. The Project Alpha team in Atlanta understood this. Their target was not the diabetic who had no choice. Their target was the American woman in her 30s who enjoyed the ritual of a cold soda in the afternoon and had started to think, for the first time in her life, about what that ritual was costing her. To reach that drinker, Tab had to taste good. Not acceptable. Good. The formula they arrived at used cyclamate as the primary sweetener, a synthetic compound roughly 30 to 50 times sweeter than table sugar, with a cleaner finish than saccharin alone. Saccharin provided backup, filling in the sweetness profile at the edges. The combination produced a flavor that the laboratory team had calibrated carefully. A cola profile with a distinct citrus sharpness at the front, followed by a carbonation bite that sat tighter and finer than Coca-Cola Classic, and a finish that cleared quickly without the cloying residue that plagued competitors. It did not taste like Coke. It was never meant to. It tasted like Tab. And for the women who became its core drinkers, that distinction mattered enormously. They were not drinking a lesser version of something else. They were drinking exactly what they had chosen. That clarity of identity extended to the packaging. The original glass bottle with its ribbed texture was distinctive enough, but it was the shift to the aluminum can in the mid-1960s that gave Tab its most enduring visual identity. The can was red and white in its earliest iterations, functional, legible, consistent with Coca-Cola's broader design language. Then, in the early 1970s, something shifted. The label moved toward pink. Not the aggressive, saturated pink of a children's product. A cooler, more confident shade that read as modern and feminine without being frivolous. That pink can became one of the most recognizable objects in American consumer culture. You could identify it from 20 feet away in a refrigerator case. You could spot it on a colleague's desk and know, without being told, something about who that person was and what they valued. Sid Dickens's logo, that unorthodox tab capitalization, played its own role in the brand's visual power. The lowercase a between two capital letters was a small, strange choice that turned out to be exactly right. It suggested confidence. It suggested that the Tab knew something the other diet sodas didn't. It was the visual equivalent of the brand's entire personality. Slightly unusual, completely sure of itself. The price point reinforced that personality. Tab was priced at parity with Coca-Cola Classic, not as a budget alternative, not as a premium product, but as an equal. That decision was more consequential than it might appear. Every other diet soda on the market was implicitly positioned as a sacrifice, something you bought instead of the real thing because you had to. Tab refused that positioning from the first day it hit shelves. Buying Tab was not a compromise. It was a preference. At roughly 12 cents a bottle in the mid-1960s, matching Coke cent for cent, Tab told its drinkers that watching what you consumed did not require paying less for the experience. The go-to-market strategy was built on three pillars that no competitor could replicate simultaneously. The first was the Coca-Cola distribution network, hundreds of thousands of retail points, vending machines, fountain accounts, and restaurant contracts that had been built over 80 years. Tab inherited all of it on day one. The second was targeted media placement. Tab's earliest print advertising ran not in general interest magazines, but in Mademoiselle, Ladies' Home Journal, and similar publications read by exactly the drinkers the brand was designed for. The imagery was deliberately sophisticated, not clinical, not cheerful in the way that soft drink advertising typically was. A graceful hand, a peacock chair, the question posed without apology. Doesn't it make sense to be refreshed with sensible modern Tab? The third pillar was restraint. Tab did not try to be everything to everyone. It chose its drinker deliberately, the weight-conscious, style-conscious American woman, and spoke to her directly, without condescension, and without the awkward medical language that had defined diet products since Hyman Kirsch's no-cal ginger ale. That restraint, in a market where most brands were shouting, turned out to be the most effective strategy of all. By 1967, Tab had overtaken Diet Right as the best-selling diet soda in America. It had done so without a formula change, without a price cut, and without abandoning the drinker it had identified in the first place. The infrastructure advantage that Coca-Cola's distribution network provided was real and enormous. But infrastructure alone does not create devotion. Tab had created something rarer, a product that people chose not because it was convenient, but because it was theirs. That devotion was about to be tested, repeatedly, and in ways that no one in Atlanta had anticipated. In the summer of 1969, the Federal Drug Administration made an announcement that sent shockwaves through every diet soda company in America. Cyclamate, the synthetic sweetener that gave Tab and every other diet cola its primary sweetness, was banned. Studies conducted on laboratory rats had linked the compound to malignant bladder tumors. The FDA moved quickly and without exception. Every product containing cyclamate had 30 days to be pulled from shelves or reformulated. There was no grandfather clause, no grace period for companies that had built their entire product lines around the ingredient. For Tab, the ban was an acute crisis. Cyclamate was not a minor ingredient in the formula. It was the foundation. Saccharin had always been present as a supporting sweetener, but saccharin alone produced a noticeably more bitter, more metallic taste profile than the cyclamate-saccharin blend that Tab drinkers had come to recognize. Coca-Cola's chemists reformulated as quickly as the timeline allowed. The result was a Tab that tasted different, not dramatically, not in a way that would register immediately for a casual drinker, but differently enough that the people who drank Tab every single day noticed within the first sip. Some of them left. Not in catastrophic numbers, but measurably. The cyclamate ban cost Tab a portion of its earliest and most committed drinkers, the ones who had followed the brand since 1963 and had calibrated their palates precisely to the original formula. The ones who stayed became something harder to define. They weren't just loyal, they were attached. Tab, with its imperfect saccharin-only formula and its growing reputation for controversy, had somehow deepened its bond with its core drinkers by surviving a crisis that should have weakened it. There is a specific kind of loyalty that forms around a product that has been threatened, a protectiveness that goes beyond preference into something closer to solidarity. Tab's drinkers developed that loyalty in 1969. They would need it many more times. But what happened in the years immediately following the cyclamate ban was not decline. It was the opposite. The 1970s were Tab's decade. The cultural conditions could not have been more precisely aligned with what Tab offered. The women's movement was reshaping American professional life at an accelerating pace. Women were entering the workforce in numbers that had no historical precedent. They were filling offices, managing their own finances, making their own consumer choices independent of husbands or households. And they were, for the first time in large numbers, thinking about their health not as a medical obligation but as a personal expression, something they controlled, something that said something about who they were. Tab was already there. It had been speaking to that drinker since 1963, before the cultural moment caught up to the product. By the early 1970s, the moment had arrived, and Tab was positioned at the exact center of it. The advertising reflected the shift. The early campaigns, including the notorious Be a Mind Sticker spots that encouraged women to drink Tab in order to maintain a figure that would stay, as the copy put it, in his mind. had been effective but uncomfortable even by the standards of their time. They sold Tab as a tool for male approval. The brand's next chapter would sell it as something more durable. In 1977, Coca-Cola launched the campaign that defined Tab for an entire generation of American drinkers. Tab, the beautiful drink for beautiful people. The television spots were simple in structure and precise in execution. Active, confident women moving through their lives, at the office, at the gym, on a city street, reaching for the pink can not as a compromise but as a reward. The jingle was direct to the point of audacity. Tab. What a beautiful drink. Tab. For beautiful people. A woman's voice at the close of each spot, holding the can, looking into the camera. Beautiful. The campaign ran during primetime network television. It ran during sports broadcasts, a deliberate choice, since Tab was beginning to make a quiet push toward male drinkers who were increasingly conscious of caloric intake in the era of jogging and racquetball. It ran in the same advertising blocks as the biggest consumer brands in the country, and it held its own without some apology. In 1978, the campaign produced what became its most remembered single execution. A 30-second television spot that featured golfer Arnold Palmer, one of the most recognizable athletes in America, a man whose very image connoted effortless excellence, alongside the model Iman, whose presence in a mass-market soft drink advertisement in 1978 was itself a statement. The spot said nothing complicated. It showed two people who embodied a certain kind of American aspiration, holding a pink can, and let the association do the work. It aired widely across national television and moved product in a way that validated every dollar Coca-Cola had invested in the campaign. By 1980, Tab was the most popular diet soda in the world. Not in America, in the world. Production figures from the period confirm the scale. Tab was being distributed across all 50 states through Coca-Cola's bottling network. The brand had expanded its line to 7 diet varieties during the late 1970s: root beer, ginger ale, black cherry, orange, lemon lime, strawberry, and the original cola, all sugar-free, all carrying the Tab logo. The pink cola remained the flagship and the volume driver. The extensions were experiments. The original was an institution. In offices from Boston to Los Angeles, the pink can occupied a specific position on the American desk that no other beverage product has quite replicated since. It was not a luxury item. It was not a status symbol in the traditional sense. It was something more personal than either of those things. A small daily declaration that the person holding it was paying attention to herself, was making a considered choice, and was not particularly interested in explaining that choice to anyone. Tab did not need a loyalty program. It had something more valuable. It had become part of the daily identity of the women who drank it. That identity showed up on screen without being purchased. Tab appeared in films and television productions throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, not through paid product placement agreements, but because it was simply present in American life. Set decorators reaching for authentic period detail reached for the pink can automatically. Writers scripting scenes in offices or kitchens or cars set in that era knew that Tab was the right object for a certain kind of character. Independent, put together, not interested in being told what to drink. Decades later, productions set in that period, from prestige cable dramas to major streaming series, would continue reaching for the Tab can as a prop. As one production designer observed, "You cannot fake the pink can. There is no substitute that reads the same way on screen." In 1982, Tab held 4% of the total American soft drink market. Regular and diet combined. In absolute terms, that represented hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, generated by a brand that had survived a sweetener ban, a formula change, escalating regulatory pressure, and 20 years of competition from every major beverage company in the country. It was the peak. Every number that followed would be smaller, And the force that would reverse 2 decades of growth was not coming from outside the building. The decision was made in Atlanta, in a boardroom, by the same company that had invented Tab, built Tab, and spent 19 years collecting the revenue Tab generated. To understand what happened in 1982, it is necessary to understand what Coca-Cola was afraid of in 1980. Diet Pepsi had been on the market since 1964. For most of its early existence, it was a secondary concern, a product that competed at the margins of the diet category, without threatening Coca-Cola's core business in any fundamental way. By the late 1970s, that had changed. Diet Pepsi was growing. It was taking share not just from Tab, but from the broader cola category. And the Pepsi brand name on the can was doing work that the Tab name, however beloved by its drinkers, simply could not match in terms of mass market recognition and masculine appeal. Coca-Cola's research showed a consistent pattern. Men who wanted a Diet Cola were more likely to reach for a product that carried a name they already associated with the full sugar version they had always preferred. Tab carried no such association. Tab was its own thing, which had been a strength in 1963 and had become by 1980 a structural limitation. The solution that emerged from Coca-Cola's internal deliberations was straightforward in concept and, as it turned out, catastrophic in its unintended consequences. Coca-Cola would create a Diet Cola that carried the Coca-Cola name, not the reformulation of Tab, a separate product built from a different flavor base, positioned to compete directly with Diet Pepsi for the calorie-conscious consumer who wanted the reassurance of the world's most recognized brand on the side of the can. The internal logic was clean. Diet Coke would go after Diet Pepsi. Tab would continue serving its existing base. The two products would coexist without cannibalizing each other because they were targeting different drinkers. That logic was wrong in almost every particular. Diet Coke launched in October 1982 with the full weight of Coca-Cola's marketing infrastructure behind it. Television, print, radio, billboards. The campaign was one of the largest product launches in the company's history. The message was unambiguous. This was not a niche product for a specific demographic. This was Coca-Cola's Diet Cola, for everyone, positioned at the center of American consumer culture, backed by a name that had been the most recognized trademark on Earth for the better part of a century. The formula was smoother than Tab, sweeter, more approachable for drinkers who found Tab's saccharine profile slightly harsh. In 1983, Coca-Cola introduced aspartame, marketed under the NutraSweet brand, into the Diet Coke formula, replacing saccharin entirely. Aspartame produced a sweetness profile dramatically closer to sugar than saccharin could achieve, without the metallic finish that Tab drinkers had learned to accept as part of the experience. By the end of 1983, Diet Coke had captured 17% of the American diet soda market. It was the fourth best-selling soft drink in the United States, regular and diet combined. The main victim of Diet Coke's success was not Diet Pepsi, it was Tab. The mechanism was not complicated. Coca-Cola, having launched Diet Coke, redirected its advertising budget. The television spots, the print campaigns, the promotional relationships, everything that had built Tab's cultural presence through the 1970s, moved to the new brand. By most accounts from Tab's devoted drinkers, the brand went essentially unadvertised from 1982 onward. Not reduced, not scaled back, gone. A product that had been one of the most actively marketed diet sodas in America became, almost overnight, a product that survived on the loyalty of existing drinkers rather than any active effort to find new ones. Tab was still on shelves. Coca-Cola's bottling network still produced and distributed it. But the company had quietly made a decision that it would not announce publicly and would not acknowledge directly for nearly 4 decades. Tab was no longer a priority. It was a legacy. And in the vocabulary of a corporation managing 500 brands across a global portfolio, legacy is another word for waiting room. Then came the second blow. In May 1984, Coca-Cola introduced NutraSweet into Tab's formula as well, replacing a portion of the saccharin content. The stated reason was consumer preference. Aspartame's cleaner sweetness profile had been validated by Diet Coke's success, and the logic of applying it to Tab seemed sound. The response from Tab's core drinkers was immediate and unambiguous. Letters arrived at Coca-Cola's Atlanta headquarters within days of the reformulation reaching shelves. The taste had changed, not subtly. The specific character of Tab, that sharp, slightly austere saccharin profile that its drinkers had calibrated their palates to over years of daily consumption, had been softened into something that tasted, to many of them, uncomfortably close to the product that had just stolen their brand's marketing budget. Some left permanently. Others stayed but registered their objection loudly enough that the response became part of Tab's institutional record, a preview in miniature of the far larger consumer revolt that would follow when Coca-Cola attempted to reformulate its flagship product 1 year later. The saccharin warning label added a third layer of pressure. Congress had mandated in 1977 that all products containing saccharin carry a consumer advisory stating that the sweetener had been shown to cause cancer in laboratory animals. Tab, which had relied on saccharin as its primary sweetener since the cyclamate ban of 1969, carried that label on every can and bottle through the late 1970s and 1980s. The warning was eventually repealed. Saccharin was delisted from the U.S. National Toxicology Program's report on carcinogens in 2000, after studies concluded that the mechanism causing cancer in rats had no plausibility in humans. But the damage to Tab's public image had accumulated over more than 2 decades of cans, with warning language that consumers associated with cigarette packaging. By 2001, Tab held less than 1% of the American soft drink market. Coca-Cola's then chairman and chief executive, Douglas Daft, was asked that year about the future of Tab. His answer was carefully worded and, in retrospect, quietly revealing. "We want to make sure those who want Tab get Tab," Daft said. "It shows you care. It shows you care. Not, Tab is a growing brand. Not, Tab has a future in our portfolio." The language of a man managing the exit of something he didn't want to be seen abandoning. Not yet. In 2005, Coca-Cola introduced Coke Zero. The company now had 3 Diet Cola products in simultaneous distribution: Diet Coke, Coke Zero, and Tab. Tab received none of the marketing support allocated to the newer brands. It received, by this point, essentially no marketing support at all. The geography contracted. Tab, once available in every Coca-Cola vending machine across all 50 states, quietly retreated to select markets, primarily Florida, parts of New York, and pockets of the Southeast where its remaining drinker base was dense enough to justify continued production. Elsewhere, it disappeared from shelves without announcement. Consumers in cities where Tab had been a fixture for decades simply stopped finding it one day and were given no explanation. In 2011, Coca-Cola produced approximately 3 million cases of Tab. In the same year, the company produced approximately 885 million cases of Diet Coke. The ratio was not a business story. It was an epitaph. In 2018, a supply disruption caused Tab to temporarily disappear from several of its remaining markets. The response from the brand's surviving drinkers, self-described tabaholics, was disproportionate to every commercial metric Tab represented. Consumers stockpiled cases. Online communities coordinated searches across cities. Petitions circulated. Coca-Cola issued a public statement confirming that Tab was not being discontinued and would return to shelves. The company did not explain why a brand with 0.1% of the diet soda market warranted a public statement. It did not need to. The answer was the same one Douglas Daft had given in 2001. It shows you care. Then March 2020 arrived. The pandemic disrupted every supply chain Coca-Cola operated. The company's leadership, already engaged in a multi-year effort to rationalize a portfolio that had grown to more than 500 brands, accelerated the timeline. The criteria were applied without sentiment. Brands that were not growing, brands that could not scale, brands that consumed production and distribution resources without generating returns that justified the allocation. Tab met every criterion for elimination. October 16th, 2020, Coca-Cola issued a press release. Tab would cease production on December 31st, 2020. 57 years. Ended in 3 paragraphs of corporate communications copy. No ceremony. No final campaign. No acknowledgement from the company's leadership beyond a single quoted line from a group director, not even a vice president, expressing gratitude to the brand's fans. The last cases shipped, the last cans were stocked on the last shelves in Florida and New York. Then those shelves were filled with something else. The sign didn't come down because there was no sign. Tab had been fading for so long that its ending had no visible moment of conclusion. It simply stopped. Production ceased. The pink can disappeared from the supply chain, and the company that had built it, neglected it, kept it on life support for 38 years, and finally ended it, moved on without looking back. On October 16, 2020, the same day Coca-Cola issued the press release announcing Tab's discontinuation, a group of drinkers in different cities across America sat down at their computers and began organizing. They called them and called themselves the Save Tab Soda Committee. They were not marketing professionals. They were not beverage industry insiders. They were people who had been drinking Tab since the 1970s, or whose mothers had kept a case of it in the garage, or who had found it in their 30s and built a daily ritual around the pink can that no other product had ever come close to replicating. They built a website. They wrote letters to Coca-Cola's Atlanta headquarters, physical letters addressed to specific executives. They delivered petitions. They staged small demonstrations outside Coca-Cola facilities. They circulated a formal proposal arguing that Tab's loyal consumer base, however small in aggregate percentage terms, represented a level of per capita devotion that the company's standard portfolio metrics were structurally incapable of measuring. As of 2025, Coca-Cola has not responded with any commitment to revive Tab. The company has, in the same period, brought back Diet Cherry Coke. It has introduced new Coke flavors, new zero sugar variants, new seasonal limited editions. Tab, the brand that made all of those products possible, remains discontinued. The trademark is held by Coca-Cola. There is no licensing agreement, no craft revival, no regional bottler producing it under a sub-brand arrangement. The formula exists in Coca-Cola's archives. The name is legally protected, and nothing is being poured into a can under either of them. What survives of Tab exists in the secondary market and in memory. Vintage Tab cans from the 1960s and early 1970s, particularly the earliest glass bottles with the raised ribbed texture, appear regularly on eBay and at antique markets across the South and Northeast. A pristine early edition Tab can in original condition sells for between $15 and $60 depending on era and condition. Sealed cases from the final production runs of 2020, purchased by Tabaholics who understood what was coming, circulate occasionally in online collector communities at prices that would have seemed absurd for a soft drink 3 decades ago. The pink can has become an artifact in the way that only objects from a genuinely concluded era become artifacts. Not as nostalgia merchandise manufactured for a market, but as the actual physical residue of something that used to exist and no longer does. Tab's visual identity has proven more durable than its commercial presence. Any film or television production set in the 1970s or early 1980s that reaches for authentic period detail reaches for the pink can. It appeared without paid arrangement in the hands of characters across some of the most watched American prestige productions of the past 15 years. Period pieces set in offices, suburban kitchens, university dormitories, hospital break rooms. The prop departments that source those cans know what production designers have understood for decades. There is no substitute that reads the same way on screen. Tab's pink can encodes an entire cultural moment, a specific intersection of feminism, fitness culture, consumer independence, and American optimism about the future of technology that no replica and no competitor has ever captured with equivalent precision. You cannot fake the pink can. Every filmmaker who has tried has ended up using the real one. The formula itself carried a flavor profile that was never successfully replicated after discontinuation. Tab's specific character, the citrus-forward sharpness, the tight carbonation, the clean finish that its drinkers described as distinct from every other Diet Cola on the market, was a function of its particular sweetener combination and production calibration. Diet Coke is a different drink, built on a different flavor base, aimed at a different drinker. Coke Zero aims at the original Coke experience, neither of them is Tab. The drinkers who understood that distinction most clearly are the ones still writing letters to Atlanta in 2025, because no amount of explanation from Coca-Cola's product development team has produced an alternative that closes the gap. Here is the detail that reframes the entire story. Tab was created in 1963 because Coca-Cola refused to put the word diet on a can of Coca-Cola. That refusal, rooted in a fear that associating the flagship brand with calorie restriction would imply that the original product was somehow harmful, drove the creation of an entirely separate brand, an entirely separate identity, and an entirely separate community of drinkers that would persist for nearly 6 decades. When Coca-Cola finally overcame that fear in 1982 and launched Diet Coke, the structural reason for Tab's existence evaporated. The brand had been built to solve a problem that its parent company had now solved differently. Tab did not fail. The problem it was designed to solve was simply reassigned to a product with a better name, by the same company, in the same building, using many of the same resources. Kerry Kopp, Coca-Cola's group director for Diet Coke, said it plainly in the press release announcing Tab's discontinuation. If not for TAB, we wouldn't have Diet Coke or Coke Zero Sugar. TAB did its job. TAB did its job. 5 words that serve simultaneously as tribute and dismissal. A corporate epitaph for a brand that spent 57 years building something real. Coca-Cola, a genuine product with a genuine taste and a genuine community of people who chose it deliberately every day because nothing else was the same, and was thanked for its service on the way out the door. There is a version of Tab's story that reads as tragedy, a pioneer discarded by the institution it created, a loyal base abandoned by the company they had supported through sweetener bans and health scares and 38 years of deliberate neglect, a flavor that existed nowhere else and now exists nowhere at all. But there is another version, and it may be the more accurate one. Tab survived the cyclamate ban of 1969. It survived the saccharin warning labels of 1977. It survived the launch of Diet Coke in 1982 and the complete withdrawal of its advertising budget. It survived Coke Zero. It survived 2 decades of being available in fewer and fewer cities. It survived a supply disruption in 2018 that should have been its quiet ending. It survived because a specific group of American drinkers, women mostly, who had found something in the pink can that the market kept telling them they no longer needed, refused to stop buying it. Tab lasted 57 years, not because Coca-Cola kept it alive. Tab lasted 57 years because its drinkers did. What that says about the relationship between a product and the people who love it, about what a brand actually is, beneath the marketing budgets and the portfolio metrics and the corporate press releases, is something that the executives who signed the discontinuation order in October 2020 may not have fully understood. The Save Tab Soda Committee understood it. They understood it well enough to still be writing letters in 2005 to a company that has, so far, declined to write back. Somewhere in Florida, In the kind of kitchen where the refrigerator has a specific shelf that has been reserved for the same thing for 30 years. Someone is opening the last can they have left. They bought it in December 2020, one of the final cases before the shelves went empty. They have been saving it. The pull tab lifts with the small, precise hiss that Tab always made. A sound its drinkers would recognize in a dark room. And for a moment. In that kitchen, 1978 is not entirely gone. See you in the next one.